The day begins before movement, before light has fully entered the streets. It begins outside a door, not a temple door, not an official building. An ordinary doorway set into stone, guarded by nothing more dramatic than habit. The street around it is quiet, but it is not empty. Men are already there, standing apart just enough to avoid touching, close enough that no one can pretend the gathering is accidental. They carry nothing of value. They are not here to deliver goods. They are here to be seen. Their clothing is clean enough to avoid offense, worn enough to signal position. Tunics washed thin, sandals that have been repaired, faces that do not expect recognition from strangers, only from the house they face. Some have arrived early. Others arrive later with the same careful pace, not rushing, not lingering, as if speed itself could be read as need. No one announces what is happening. It is understood. A client waits outside a patron's door with other clients waiting for the same reason. The street becomes a corridor of patience. There is no marked line. Rank appears in smaller details. How close one dares stand to the threshold, how easily one is allowed to remain there, how familiar the servants' eyes seem when they glance out and look past. The door does not open immediately. It opens when it opens. Some men shift their weight. Others hold still. Conversation is sparse, not from reverence, but from caution. Words create impressions, and impressions are difficult to control. Silence is safer. In silence, one can appear attentive without risking misjudgment. One can appear respectful without explaining anything. Hunger is not yet sharp, but it is present. Not a crisis. A quiet pressure the body recognizes. What fills the mind instead is sequence. Who must be acknowledged first? Who must not be missed? Who can be approached later? And who cannot be approached at all? A servant steps out. He does not greet the group. He calls a name. The name is not loud. It does not need to be. Everyone is listening for it. Each man knows the sound of his own name in another person's mouth. The called man moves forward and disappears inside. The others remain where they are, waiting resumes without comment. Inside, the exchange is brief. The patron sits or stands at ease. He may ask nothing. He may ask a question that requires no real answer. The purpose of speech here is not information, but tone. Gratitude must be visible without looking practiced. Deference must be clear without becoming cloying. The client measures his words the way he measures his posture, enough to show he understands the arrangement, not enough to draw attention to it. Sometimes a small gift is given. A token, a coin, a promise, a portion of food to be collected later. Sometimes there is only acknowledgement. That, too, has value. Being seen today means being remembered tomorrow. Being remembered means the door might open again. The city does not call this humiliation. It calls it order. Order is easier to live inside when it is treated as ordinary. The client leaves without lingering. Lingering suggests need, and visible need becomes tiresome. He lowers his head slightly, not deeply, not ceremonially. The gesture shortens the moment. It turns the exchange into something efficient. Outside, he steps aside so the next name can be called. By mid-morning, the streets fill. Merchants arrange goods. Laborers gather where work might be offered. Officials pass with attendants, not looking at those they pass unless addressed directly. To address them requires timing, stepping forward without blocking, speaking without raising the voice, accepting interruption without protest. Often, interruption comes immediately. A request begins and is not finished. A sentence trails off because the official has already turned away. This is not interpreted as insult. It is interpreted as instruction. One learns when to stop speaking by how quickly one is ignored. Those who need permits, favors, exemptions, small permissions that allow daily life to proceed. Learn to return again and again. Not persistence, exactly, but presence. To be seen often without becoming conspicuous is a skill. It requires restraint. At the market, dependence changes shape. Prices shift for those without standing. A seller watches the buyer's hands, his clothing, the confidence with which he speaks. A slight pause before naming a price is enough to invite an increase. The buyer may object mildly, but only mildly. Open dispute risks being remembered as troublesome. Coins are counted slowly, so the seller sees they are real. The seller recounts them anyway. No one comments on the delay. Time is not equal across the city. Some spend it freely. Others wait to receive it. Work, when it comes, is rarely dignified in any abstract sense. Tasks are assigned without explanation. One carries, cleans, copies, stands. Instructions arrive in fragments. Praise is rare and unnecessary. Completion is assumed. If correction comes, it is brief and public. A word, a gesture, sometimes a small laugh from someone nearby. The laughter is not cruel. It is incidental. The moment passes. The work continues. At midday, some eat. Others wait. Those who eat do so quickly, often standing. Those who wait do not announce it. Hunger, like dependence, is best managed quietly. Throughout the day, small acts of yielding occur without notice. One steps aside in a narrow street. One lowers the eyes. One allows another to speak first. None of it feels dramatic. Repetition gives it weight. The city runs on these gestures. They are as necessary as water and stone. As light shifts, fatigue settles into the body. The calculations do not stop. Tomorrow is already being assembled from today's results. Who responded? Who delayed? Who noticed? Who did not? There is no expectation this will change. Humiliation, if it can be called that, does not arrive as an event. It is distributed across hours, diluted by custom. It lives in waiting without complaint, asking without insisting, thanking for what should perhaps have been given without thanks. By evening, the streets quiet again. Those who have eaten feel the weight of it. Those who have not feel something else. Both return to their rooms with the same awareness that greeted them in the morning. Tomorrow will begin the same way, not with action, but with consideration of who must be pleased. Morning does not conclude the work of accommodation. It only establishes its tone. After the first obligations have been met or deferred, the city moves into a slower rhythm. The initial urgency fades, replaced by a sustained attentiveness. For those without secure position, the rest of the day is spent maintaining visibility without attracting notice, compliance without erasure. Many return to spaces where they are neither guests nor owners. Workshops, warehouses, porticos, counting rooms. These places are not hostile. They are indifferent. Indifference is more demanding than hostility because it offers no clear rules to resist. In a workshop, tasks are assigned without ceremony. The master may not be present. Instructions are relayed through intermediaries, freedmen, senior laborers, clerks, each enforcing authority slightly more sharply than they received it. This sharpening is not deliberate. It is a byproduct of proximity. Those closest to power absorb its habits. A man is told to wait. He waits. The waiting is not passive. He must remain alert, prepared to move when called, yet careful not to appear idle. Idleness suggests excess time, and excess time suggests usefulness is declining. He shifts tools, cleans surfaces already clean, reorders items that were never disordered. No one thanks him for this. Thanks would imply choice. At intervals, he is corrected. The correction is small, a gesture, a word, sometimes only a look. The message is clear without elaboration. He adjusts immediately. Delay would be interpreted as resistance, and resistance carries consequences disproportionate to its cause. In these environments, speech is economical. Questions are asked rarely and answered briefly. Clarification is risky. It suggests that instructions were insufficient, which reflects poorly on the one who gave them. Better to guess and accept correction later. Mistakes are not exceptional. They are expected. The response to them is routine. Elsewhere in the city, others attend to different forms of dependence. A tenant visits a landlord's agent. A tradesman negotiates access to space, water, storage. Each interaction requires demonstration of deference calibrated to the other party's status. Too little appears insolent. Too much appears manipulative. The calibration is learned over years. It is rarely taught directly. Children observe it. Apprentices imitate it. Those who fail to learn it quickly find themselves excluded from informal arrangements that make survival possible. Money changes hands in small amounts. The sums are not humiliating in themselves. What carries weight is the manner of exchange. Payment is offered promptly. Change is accepted without scrutiny. To count it carefully would imply distrust. To question it would imply equality. Trust, like dignity, flows in one direction. At public buildings, the process repeats. Forms are submitted. Names are recorded. Decisions are postponed. The posture required here is patient neutrality. Anger is ineffective. Enthusiasm is suspicious. One stands, one waits, one responds when addressed. Often, one is not addressed at all. Being unseen in these spaces is not an error in the system. It is part of its function. Attention is reserved for those whose absence would be noticed. For others, presence alone must suffice. In the streets, interactions appear lighter, but the same structures persist. A messenger passes and others step aside. A magistrate's litter approaches and conversation stops until it passes. These pauses are not mandated. They are reflexive. No one remarks on them afterward. At midday, when heat gathers and movement slows, the strain becomes more visible. Bodies tire. Faces lose animation. The careful politeness of the morning gives way to mechanical compliance. Requests are answered with nods rather than words. Instructions are followed without comment. This is when the repetition reveals itself most clearly. There is no single moment that could be identified as degrading. Instead, there are dozens of small adjustments, each insignificant on its own, accumulating quietly. A man is addressed by his occupation rather than his name. He responds. Another is spoken over. He stops speaking. Another is kept waiting while others are admitted ahead of him. He does not object. Objection would require explanation, and explanation would require acknowledgement of hierarchy. Silence avoids that exposure. Those with slightly more security, steady employment, a reliable patron, family connections, experience these moments differently. They recognize them, but they do not linger on them. Their position allows them to treat accommodation as strategy rather than necessity. For those without such buffers, accommodation is continuous. There is no transition between self and role. The posture maintained in public extends into private spaces. Even among peers, caution persists. One does not boast. One does not complain openly. Complaints invite questions, and questions invite scrutiny. As afternoon progresses, some obligations resolve. A task is completed. A payment is received. A promise is made, even if it is vague. Each resolution brings temporary relief, not satisfaction. Satisfaction would imply closure, and closure is rare. More often, the resolution is partial. enough to justify returning tomorrow, enough to prevent withdrawal. Dependence thrives in this partiality. Toward evening, as officials withdraw and workshops close, the city appears to soften. Voices grow louder. Movement becomes less regulated. But the structures do not dissolve. They simply become less visible. In taverns and shared courtyards, men speak more freely, but even here, hierarchy shapes conversation. Some speak and are listened to. Others speak and are tolerated. Some do not speak at all, choosing observation over participation. Stories are exchanged, not of humiliation, but of endurance, of waiting, of delays overcome, of small successes framed as skill rather than luck. The framing matters. To admit luck would be to admit vulnerability. Food is shared unevenly. Portions are not measured precisely. No one comments. Commenting would require accounting, and accounting would expose imbalance. As darkness approaches, calculations resume. Who must be seen again? Who has grown impatient? Who might be avoided? The mental inventory is constant, though rarely articulated. Sleep, when it comes, does not erase these concerns. It suspends them. The day has required no extraordinary submission, no public disgrace, no dramatic loss. It has required only consistency, yielding at the right moments, speaking when permitted, waiting without complaint. This is not perceived as oppression. It is perceived as order. And because it is orderly, because it repeats without deviation, it becomes unremarkable. The body adapts. The mind learns not to dwell. Tomorrow will not demand anything different. It will ask only for the same quiet adjustments, made again and again, until they no longer feel like adjustments at all. By the third movement of the day, endurance replaces anticipation. What remains is not the effort of asking, but the discipline of remaining acceptable. The morning required correct appearance. The afternoon demanded compliance. The later hours test something quieter, the ability to remain composed when nothing is being actively demanded, yet everything is still being evaluated. Many Romans occupy spaces where they are visible without being central. Doorways, benches, shaded edges of courtyards. These are positions chosen deliberately. To withdraw completely suggests irrelevance. To intrude suggests presumption. The middle ground is narrow and must be maintained. Here, posture matters more than speech. The back is straight but not rigid. The gaze is forward but lowered when necessary. Hands are occupied or folded. Stillness communicates readiness. Too much movement suggests impatience. Too little suggests fatigue. Fatigue, however, is constant. The body carries the memory of earlier submissions. Knees stiffen from standing. The neck remembers how often it bent. These sensations are not interpreted as injuries. They are understood as the cost of the day, no different from dust on the skin or heat in the lungs. When addressed, response must be immediate but restrained. One does not appear eager. Eagerness implies desperation, and desperation invites exploitation. One does not appear reluctant. Reluctance implies resistance, which invites correction. This balance is maintained instinctively by those who have practiced it long enough. Others learn quickly or disappear from view. In households where dependents work, scribes, attendants, freedmen, hired hands, the atmosphere shifts subtly as the day progresses. Early orders are explicit, later ones are abbreviated. The expectation is that familiarity will compensate for clarity. It often does not. When instructions are incomplete, responsibility flows downward. If a task is done incorrectly, the error is attributed not to ambiguity, but to incompetence. The correction is delivered without anger. Anger would elevate the mistake. Neutrality reduces it to routine. Routine absorbs blame efficiently. In these environments, gratitude is directional. Dependents express it. Superiors acknowledge it rarely. When acknowledgement does occur, it is remembered for a long time, not because it is meaningful in itself, but because it interrupts expectation. Most days offer no such interruption. Outside, in public spaces, the same patterns repeat under different names. A man seeks casual labor at a construction site. He waits with others. Selection is quick and unexplained. Some are chosen, others are not. Those not chosen disperse without comment. There is no appeal. Appeal would require justification, and justification would require standing. Absence of standing is the very reason for the appeal. The chosen men work until dismissed. Dismissal comes when it comes. It is not announced in advance. Planning is difficult under these conditions, but planning is still expected. Failure to plan is treated as personal deficiency, not structural constraint. Later, a clerk records names in a ledger. The handwriting is careful. The information is not shared. To be recorded is necessary. To know how one is recorded is not permitted. Those waiting to be recorded observe the process closely. They watch how names are pronounced, how quickly entries are made, which ones receive pauses. These observations inform future behavior. If a name is mispronounced and corrected, that correction is remembered. It may be advantageous later. Small advantages matter. In conversation, humility is performed subtly. One does not contradict directly. One reframes. One agrees first, then adjusts slightly. This style of speech is not taught as etiquette. It emerges from repeated consequences. Those who speak plainly do not speak for long. As the sun lowers, patience thins across the city. Not into anger, but into efficiency. Interactions shorten. Requests become more abrupt. Tolerance for error decreases. This is when humiliation, if noticed at all, becomes most visible. Not because it increases, but because the margin for absorbing it narrows. A delayed response feels sharper. An ignored presence feels heavier. Still, no one names it. Naming would require shared acknowledgement. Shared acknowledgement would suggest the possibility of change. The structure does not allow for that implication. Instead, individuals adjust internally. They reduce expectation. They reinterpret slightness as accident. They attribute neglect to busyness rather than choice. These interpretations are not naive. They are protective. The alternative, recognizing disregard as deliberate, would demand response. Response would carry risk. In the late afternoon, some obligations are reversed. A man who waited earlier may now be the one waited on, if only briefly. A tool is returned to him. A message is relayed through him. These moments do not erase earlier dependencies. They coexist with them. The city functions through these overlaps. In private rooms, preparations for evening begin. Clothing is brushed. Faces are washed. The gestures are small, but they restore a sense of separateness. Public posture is set aside, partially. The body relaxes, but not fully. Tomorrow is already present. Those who eat do so with measured relief. Those who do not eat do not dramatize it. Hunger has been managed all day through distraction and movement. It is acknowledged now quietly. Conversation turns to neutral subjects. Weather, rumors, events observed at a distance. Personal grievance is avoided. To speak of it would require trust, and trust is difficult to measure. Laughter occurs, but it is restrained. Loud laughter attracts attention. Attention invites questions. As darkness settles, the city's hierarchies do not disappear. They become harder to see, but easier to feel. In the absence of constant activity, memory surfaces. A delayed answer. A dismissed gesture. A moment of waiting that lasted longer than expected. These memories are not organized into narratives. They remain isolated, unexamined. To examine them would be to connect them, and connection would suggest pattern. Patterns are dangerous when recognized. Sleep arrives unevenly. Some fall into it quickly, exhausted by compliance. Others remain awake, reviewing the day without intention, replaying exchanges without conclusion. The day has not contained humiliation in the dramatic sense. No single act stands out. What it has contained is alignment, continuous, minor, and unremarked. By the time the city grows quiet, the adjustments have already been absorbed. They no longer register as concessions. They register as habit. Tomorrow will ask for the same habits. It will not announce this need. It will assume it. As evening gives way to night, the city does not rest so much as contract. Activity narrows. Choices diminish. What remains is less visible, but no less structured. For those whose days are governed by others, night offers neither freedom nor release. It offers only a pause and observation. In the smaller dwellings, rooms are shared by necessity rather than preference. Privacy is limited. Speech carries. Even here, behavior remains moderated. One does not speak loudly of the day. One does not replay slights in full detail. Walls are thin, and discretion extends beyond safety into habit. Those who rent space understand this well. A complaint overheard can travel. A rumor requires no accuracy to be effective. Silence protects more reliably than truth. As lamps are lit in wealthier houses, attendants move carefully, adjusting light, bringing water, clearing remnants of meals they did not share. The work is quieter now, but it demands the same attentiveness. A dropped object, a delayed response, an unnecessary sound stands out more in the evening. Correction, when it comes, is quieter too. A look, a pause, a word spoken just loudly enough to be heard by one person. Public reprimand is unnecessary. The audience is limited, but the message is complete. In these moments, humiliation does not feel acute. It feels procedural. The correction is not an evaluation of worth, but of function. This distinction matters. Function can be repaired. Worth, if questioned, would require defense. Defense is not expected. Elsewhere, in shared courtyards and stairwells, conversations drift. Some speak of work. Others speak of nothing in particular. These exchanges do not seek depth. They seek continuity. Talking fills time and reduces the sense of isolation without exposing vulnerability. When someone mentions difficulty, it is framed abstractly. Things are slow. There is less work. It is hard this season. The statements invite recognition without demanding response. Responses are brief. Agreement is safer than advice. Children observe these patterns without instruction. They learn when to interrupt and when not to. They learn how long to hold someone's gaze. They learn the difference between being heard and being acknowledged. These lessons are not cruelly imposed. They are absorbed naturally, reinforced by outcomes rather than punishment. In taverns, the tone shifts slightly. Drink loosens posture, but not structure. Some voices grow louder. Others withdraw further. The presence of authority is indirect but understood. A tavern keeper watches carefully. Disorder invites attention, and attention carries consequences. A man may complain briefly here, but he chooses his audience. He lowers his voice. He frames his words as misfortune rather than injustice. The difference is subtle, but it determines whether the complaint is tolerated. Those listening nod. Some offer sympathy. No one suggests remedy. Remedy would imply change, and change is not discussed casually. As the night deepens, certain tasks continue. Guards patrol. Messengers move. Slaves and freedmen remain awake to attend needs that may or may not arise. Waiting resumes, now in darkness. Waiting at night feels different. There is less pretense of productivity. One waits simply because one must be available. Availability is itself a demonstration of loyalty. Sleep is taken in turns. Some sleep lightly, prepared to wake. Others do not sleep at all. Fatigue accumulates without acknowledgement. In this state, the body becomes more aware of its limits. Hunger is sharper. Muscles ache. Yet these sensations are internalized. To express them would be to request accommodation. And accommodation is a privilege. Those with status request it without hesitation. Those without do not request it at all. In wealthy houses, guests recline and speak freely. Servants stand or move around them, adjusting space, refilling cups, responding to gestures that require no words. The asymmetry is pronounced but unremarked. No one thanks the hand that passes the cup. The hand withdraws without expectation. These scenes are repeated across the city in variations. The scale changes, but the pattern remains. One group rests because another remains alert. One speaks because another listens. No one names this arrangement as humiliation. It is named order. Order is valued precisely because it reduces uncertainty. Each person knows what is expected, even if what is expected is submission. Later, when lights dim and voices fade, the city becomes quieter. The stillness does not equal peace. It is simply absence of demand. For some, this absence is relief. For others, it is unsettling. Without immediate instruction, the mind returns to unfinished exchanges. A request not yet answered. A look interpreted but not explained. A favor extended without confirmation. These uncertainties require management. One rehearses future responses mentally. One plans alternative approaches. One considers which dependencies are becoming too visible. Even in rest, calculation continues. Before sleep, rituals are minimal. A wash, a rearrangement of belongings. These acts restore a sense of agency, however small. They are performed carefully, almost ceremonially. In the dark, dignity is not reclaimed. It is set aside. The body relaxes into positions shaped by the day's demands. The night does not erase humiliation. It stores it, unexamined, ready to be resumed. By morning, the awareness will return without prompting. Who must be pleased? Who must be avoided? Who must be waited for? The city rests only enough to continue. Morning returns without renewal. The light enters the city gradually, touching walls and roofs before it reaches the rooms where most people wake. There is no sense of beginning again, only continuation. The body rises because it must. The mind resumes its accounting without pause. What has changed since yesterday is not position, but memory. Each interaction from the previous day carries forward. A patron's indifference, an official's delay, an employer's brief approval. These are not resolved events. They are signals, interpreted and stored. The day ahead will be shaped by them. For many, the first task is not movement, but adjustment. A man considers whether to return to the same door as yesterday or to wait longer, allowing absence to be interpreted as restraint rather than neglect. Another decides whether to press a request again or to remain visible without asking, hoping patience will be rewarded. These decisions are made quietly. There is no one to consult. Advice would expose dependency, and dependency is already visible enough. As the streets fill, the same patterns emerge. Clients walk toward familiar houses. Laborers gather where they gathered before. Vendors prepare goods they may or may not sell. The repetition does not dull attention. It sharpens it. Small deviations matter more precisely because the structure is stable. A nod from a patron that was absent yesterday is noticed. A longer pause before dismissal is noted. A servant's tone shifts slightly. These changes are not celebrated. They are evaluated. Hope, when it appears, is managed carefully. Uncontrolled hope leads to disappointment, and disappointment leads to visible frustration. Frustration has consequences. In the morning visits, exchanges remain brief. Familiarity does not soften them. If anything, it increases expectation. A man who has been seen often is expected to know his place more exactly. Errors made repeatedly are judged more harshly than first mistakes. Correction arrives faster now. A word spoken too early. A request framed too directly. The response is not explanation, but silence. Silence is instructive. After the visits, some leave with tangible results. Others leave with nothing that can be counted. Both carry the same outward expression. Relief is not displayed. Disappointment is not shown. The street is not the place for either. Work resumes. For those employed, tasks repeat with minimal variation. The familiarity offers a kind of comfort. Knowing what will be demanded reduces anxiety, even when what is demanded is submission. For those without stable work, the day stretches differently. Time becomes uneven. Waiting fills more hours. The body remains alert, ready to be summoned, yet increasingly aware that it may not be. Waiting without purpose is difficult to endure openly. Men find ways to appear occupied. They watch deliveries. They listen to conversations not meant for them. They adjust clothing that does not need adjustment. These gestures are not deceptive. They are defensive. In these hours, humiliation becomes almost invisible. There is no act to point to, no exchange to recount. There is only absence of instruction, of acknowledgement, of necessity. To be unnecessary is not a dramatic condition. It does not provoke response. It simply extends. At midday, when others pause to eat, those still waiting calculate whether to leave. Leaving risks missing an opportunity. Staying risks exhaustion. The decision is rarely optimal. It is made anyway. Hunger sharpens perception. Small slights feel heavier. Sounds irritate. The body's demands compete with the discipline of restraint. This is when self-control matters most. A man may approach an acquaintance, someone slightly better positioned, and ask indirectly whether help might be possible. The phrasing is careful. It leaves room for refusal without embarrassment. Refusal comes often in the form of deflection. Not today. Perhaps later. I will see. Each phrase preserves the relationship while offering nothing immediate. Gratitude is still expressed. The afternoon unfolds slowly. Officials appear and disappear. Access opens briefly, then closes again. Those who manage to speak do so quickly, compressing requests into a few sentences. They accept interruption as natural. When a request is acknowledged, even vaguely, it produces a temporary lightness. Not satisfaction, but permission to continue. The permission is fragile. It must be protected by continued compliance. Toward evening, fatigue accumulates. The effort of constant self-regulation becomes visible in posture, in slower responses, in eyes that avoid contact slightly longer than intended. These signs are risky. They can be interpreted as disrespect or disinterest. Men correct themselves when they notice. They straighten. They refocus. Habit compensates for exhaustion. As daylight fades, outcomes are tallied internally. Who responded? Who did not? Who seemed receptive? Who seemed irritated? These assessments guide tomorrow's approach. There is no sense of progress in the modern sense. Advancement is incremental and reversible. A single misjudgment can erase weeks of careful positioning. This knowledge does not provoke fear. It produces caution. In the evening, conversations resume in familiar spaces. The day is summarized without detail. Nothing today. Some work. We will see. These phrases communicate enough. No one asks for elaboration. Elaborating would require confronting imbalance directly. Silence allows everyone to preserve the appearance of agency. When sleep comes, it is shallow. The body rests, but the mind remains partially engaged. Patterns repeat in memory. Alternatives are rehearsed. The day has not been extraordinary. It has not been cruel. It has required no public abasement. It has required something quieter, the steady acceptance that one's value must be demonstrated repeatedly, and that demonstration takes the form of yielding. By morning, this acceptance will no longer feel like acceptance. It will feel like routine, and routine, once established, is difficult to imagine living without. By now, the rhythm no longer feels imposed. It feels internal. What was once learned through correction is now anticipated. Movements adjust before instruction arrives. Speech shortens before interruption occurs. The body complies in advance, not out of fear, but out of familiarity. This anticipation is efficient. It reduces friction. It also reduces choice. In the early hours, those who depend on favor no longer ask themselves whether to present themselves. They ask only how. Which expression? Which words omitted? Which acknowledged first? The structure of dependence has been absorbed so fully that deviation feels unnatural. The streets show this clearly. People move with practiced awareness of invisible boundaries. They slow instinctively near certain houses. They quicken their pace near others. These are not conscious decisions. They are habits shaped by consequence. A man pauses before crossing a threshold. He does not know why he hesitates. He waits anyway. In places of work, the same anticipatory discipline governs behavior. Tasks are begun before being assigned. Tools are prepared without request. When an instruction finally comes, it confirms what has already been done. This creates the appearance of harmony. Harmony, however, is not equality. It is alignment. One will move first. Others follow so closely that the distance is difficult to measure. When mistakes occur, they are smaller now. A missed gesture, a delayed glance. The response is correspondingly restrained. A raised eyebrow, a brief silence. These signals are enough. Correction no longer requires words. Those receiving correction understand it immediately. They adjust without explanation. Explanation would suggest uncertainty, and uncertainty would imply that anticipation had failed. In public interactions, this refinement is visible. A petitioner approaches an official not when the official is free, but when the official appears open to interruption. This distinction is subtle. It is learned through repeated observation of failed attempts. Some learn it quickly, others never do. Those who fail are not punished openly. They are simply ignored more often. Ignorance is not a dramatic sanction. It leaves no trace. It requires no justification. In marketplaces, negotiations become quieter. Prices are accepted with minimal resistance. The performance of objection fades. Sellers expect this. Buyers understand it. The transaction proceeds smoothly. Smoothness is valued. Smoothness conceals imbalance by eliminating visible conflict. When conflict does not occur, there is nothing to remember. As the day progresses, the sense of self narrows. Not in the sense of loss, but in the sense of focus. Attention is directed outward, toward cues, toward responses, toward timing. Internal states become secondary. Hunger is noticed only when it interferes with composure. Fatigue is acknowledged only when it threatens performance. Other sensations are set aside. This selective awareness is not experienced as deprivation. It is experienced as discipline. Among peers, conversation reflects this shift. Complaints decrease. Stories become observational rather than personal. One describes events without placing oneself at their center. This style of speech is admired. It suggests control. Control, even when limited, is preferable to exposure. In the afternoon, some experience brief reversals of position. A man who has waited may now be needed. A message must be carried. A task requires his presence. For a short time, others look toward him. He does not linger in this moment. He fulfills the task efficiently. He returns to his place without comment. To display satisfaction would invite correction. These reversals do not disrupt the structure. They reinforce it. They demonstrate that participation is possible, but conditional. Conditional participation sustains hope without altering dependence. Later, when the city slows again, the accumulated adjustments of the day reveal their cost. The body feels heavier. Responses take more effort. Attention slips. This is when errors are most likely and when tolerance is lowest. A response is delayed by a breath too long. A gesture is missed. The correction comes quietly, but it comes. The individual absorbs it without visible reaction. Reaction would draw attention. Attention would extend the moment. As evening approaches, interactions shorten further. The expectation is no longer performance, but availability. Being present is enough. One waits without instruction, ready to respond if needed. This waiting is different from the waiting of the morning. It is less anxious, more resigned. The outcome matters less than the posture maintained. In shared spaces, people sit closer now, not out of intimacy, but out of fatigue. Conversation fades in and out. Silence is not uncomfortable. It is familiar. In this silence, the day's repetitions settle. The mind does not catalog them individually. It registers only that they have occurred. Humiliation, if considered at all, has lost its sharp edges. It is no longer perceived as something inflicted. It is experienced as a condition of participation. Participation, after all, allows survival. As night deepens, the city holds its breath, not in expectation, but in suspension. The systems that govern the day remain in place, inactive but intact. Sleep arrives gradually. The body yields again, this time to rest. By morning, the anticipatory discipline will resume without instruction. It will guide movement, speech, and silence. What once required effort now requires only presence. And presence, maintained long enough, becomes indistinguishable from acceptance. What has been learned no longer feels learned. By this point, the mechanisms that govern daily conduct operate beneath awareness. There is no sense of being instructed, corrected, or guided. There is only the feeling that certain actions are natural and others unthinkable. The day unfolds with minimal internal resistance. When a man steps aside in a narrow street, he does not register the act as yielding. It feels like courtesy. When he lowers his voice while speaking to someone of higher standing, it feels like propriety. When he waits to be addressed rather than speaking freely, it feels like order. Language adjusts to support this perception. Words that might imply imbalance are avoided. One speaks of respect, patience, good sense. These terms soften the structure without altering it. In this way, dependence becomes self-maintaining. At work, the boundaries between instruction and intuition blur further. A task does not need to be assigned to be understood. The absence of instruction is not confusing. It is interpreted as trust, even when it is merely oversight. Trust is assumed, not confirmed. This assumption carries risk, but the risk is preferable to uncertainty. Acting without instruction allows one to remain useful. Waiting for clarity risks appearing idle. Thus, initiative is expressed only within narrow limits. One anticipates needs, but does not redefine them. Creativity is restrained. Efficiency is prized. Those who exceed these limits are not punished immediately. Their deviation is noted. Later, opportunities pass them by without explanation. This absence of opportunity is not framed as consequence. It is framed as chance. Chance is a convenient explanation. It absolves responsibility on all sides. In public spaces, the same internalization is visible. People arrange themselves instinctively around those of higher status. Space opens without command. Attention aligns without direction. No one coordinates this movement. It emerges collectively, reinforced by habit. A visitor unfamiliar with the city might interpret this as harmony. There is little noise. Few visible disputes. Movement appears orderly. What is unseen is the continuous adjustment that sustains this appearance. Adjustment is constant, but it is no longer experienced as effort. It has become the background against which effort is measured. Requests, when made, are phrased as observations rather than demands. If it is convenient, when you have time, these phrases carry no expectation of fulfillment. They serve primarily to demonstrate awareness of position. Awareness is valued more than success. When a request is denied, the denial often arrives indirectly. A delay extends. A response never comes. The absence is interpreted correctly and accepted without comment. To press further would suggest failure to understand. Understanding, even when it leads to loss, preserves dignity of a particular kind, the dignity of alignment. In the later hours, as fatigue deepens, this alignment becomes more visible in posture. Shoulders curve slightly inward. Movement slow. Eyes avoid prolonged contact. These signs are not read as weakness. They are read as familiarity with the day's demands. Familiarity reassures those in authority. It signals that expectations have been absorbed. Those who remain too upright, too alert, too intense risk appearing unsuited to their position. Excess energy can be unsettling. It suggests aspiration beyond one's place. Aspiration, when visible, invites scrutiny. Among peers, conversation now reflects a shared understanding that requires few words. Exchanges are brief. Much is left unsaid. A nod communicates recognition. A pause communicates caution. No one explains these signals. Explanation would imply novelty. Novelty would imply instability. Stability is preserved through silence. As evening approaches again, the city settles into repetition that feels almost circular. What was endured yesterday is endured today with less friction. What felt sharp before now feels rounded, smoothed by familiarity. This smoothing is not relief. It is adaptation. Adaptation allows the individual to function without constant awareness of cost. It prevents exhaustion of attention. It also ensures that the structure remains unquestioned. Questioning requires distance. Distance is difficult to maintain when adjustment fills every hour. In quieter moments, there is sometimes a faint awareness of constraint. It arises unexpectedly, in a pause, in a memory of something unsaid, in the brief recognition that one's movements are not entirely one's own. The awareness does not last. It is quickly replaced by practical thought. What remains to be done? Where one must be tomorrow? Whom one must avoid disappointing? These considerations restore equilibrium. By nightfall, the day has left no distinct impression. There is no single moment to recall, no incident to mark. The day has functioned as intended. The absence of drama is its success. In this absence, humiliation has completed its transformation. It is no longer felt as something imposed from outside. It is embedded in rhythm, posture, timing. It is part of how one belongs. Belonging, after all, is not granted freely. It is maintained through continuous, quiet adjustment, so regular, so expected, that it ceases to feel like adjustment at all. At this stage, the day no longer announces itself as obligation. It presents itself as continuity. There is little sense of beginning or ending. Morning blends into midday, midday into evening, each phase marked not by change in purpose, but by change in tempo. The structure holds steady. Only the pace shifts. Those who move through the city do so with practiced efficiency. They no longer scan for approval consciously. Their bodies register cues automatically. A slight turn of the head, a slowing of steps, a pause before speaking. These adjustments occur without reflection. Reflection would interrupt flow. In this flow, dependence is rarely acknowledged directly. It does not need to be. It is encoded in behavior. One does not speak of reliance on patrons, officials, or employers. One speaks instead of schedules, arrangements, opportunities. Language replaces structure with circumstance. When something fails, when a promise is not kept, when work does not appear, when access closes unexpectedly, the explanation offered is never personal. It is difficult now. Times have changed. There are many others. These phrases distribute responsibility so evenly that it disappears. The individual absorbs the outcome without protest. Protest would require identifying a source. Identifying a source would imply accountability. Accountability is not expected from those who hold power. It is expected from those who seek it. Thus, the response to loss is adjustment rather than challenge. In places of labor, this is especially visible. A task once assigned regularly may simply stop appearing. No explanation is given. The absence is not discussed. The individual waits, returns, waits again. Eventually, if the task does not resume, he finds another place to stand. This movement is not framed as displacement. It is framed as adaptation. Adaptation is praised. Those who adapt are described as sensible, realistic, patient. Patience becomes a virtue not because it leads to reward, but because it reduces disruption. In public settings, officials continue to receive petitions. They listen selectively. Their attention moves quickly, guided by criteria that are not articulated. Those who are passed over do not react visibly. They have learned that visibility without invitation is a liability. The absence of reaction is itself a performance. It signals comprehension. Comprehension is rewarded occasionally, unpredictably, just enough to reinforce the pattern. Unpredictability sustains engagement. As the day wears on, physical fatigue blends with mental narrowing. Decisions become simpler. One chooses the familiar route, the familiar place to wait, the familiar phrasing. Novelty requires energy. Energy is conserved for moments that matter. Which moments matter is determined externally. In shared spaces, interactions become more economical. Gestures replace words. A raised hand signals dismissal. A brief glance signals permission. These signals are understood immediately. Those who miss them are corrected, quietly or indirectly. Correction rarely takes the form of instruction. It takes the form of exclusion. A conversation stops. A task is reassigned. An invitation does not come again. These absences accumulate. They are noticed individually, but not connected. Connection would reveal pattern. As evening approaches once more, the city's activity thins. Those who remain active do so because they are required to. Others withdraw to spaces where their absence will not be noted. This withdrawal is not retreat. It is positioning. Knowing when to disappear is as important as knowing when to appear. The balance is delicate. Too much absence suggests disengagement. Too much presence suggests need. Need, when visible, loses value. In private rooms, the body finally loosens its discipline slightly. Shoulders drop. Breathing deepens. The release is physical, not conceptual. The mind does not re-examine the day. It simply rests from managing it. If thoughts return, they return in fragments. A face, a word, a delay. These fragments do not assemble into complaint. They drift and fade. Over time, this fading becomes reliable. The mind learns which impressions to keep and which to let dissolve. Sharpness dulls. Edges smooth. This smoothing is not numbness. It is efficiency. By removing emotional emphasis, the day becomes easier to repeat. Repetition becomes sustainable. The city depends on this sustainability. Without it, the volume of small adjustments required would overwhelm those who make them. Thus, endurance is cultivated not through strength, but through normalization. What once might have felt like humiliation is now experienced as ordinary interaction. Waiting is not degrading. It is expected. Being ignored is not insulting. It is informative. Yielding is not submission. It is competence. These reinterpretations do not change the structure. They make it livable. As night deepens again, the city settles into a familiar stillness. Those who must remain awake remain. Those who may sleep do so lightly. Tomorrow will not introduce new demands. It will repeat existing ones. The knowledge of this does not provoke dread. It produces readiness. Readiness is the final adjustment. When anticipation replaces reaction entirely, the structure no longer presses from outside. It holds from within. Toward the end of the cycle, the city no longer feels external. Its demands are no longer encountered as pressures applied from outside, but as expectations already met before they are expressed. The individual does not experience himself as responding to Rome. He experiences himself as functioning within it. This distinction matters. When expectation is external, it can be resisted, even if resistance is impractical. When expectation is internal, resistance appears unnecessary, even irrational. The adjustment has already been made. The day proceeds with fewer visible pauses. Waiting still occurs, but it feels less like interruption and more like default condition. One does not wait for something. One waits until something happens. Time becomes less segmented. Hours lose their character. Morning is not hopeful. Evening is not relieving. Both are simply states in which certain actions are more or less likely. Those who depend on favor continue to present themselves, but the act has lost its emotional charge. The walk to a patron's house feels no different from any other errand. The posture assumed at the threshold is not chosen. It emerges. If the door opens, one enters. If it does not, one notes this and moves on. The noting is internal and brief. At work, the same narrowing persists. Tasks are completed efficiently. Errors are corrected quickly. Feedback is absorbed without reflection. There is no longer a sense of being evaluated. Evaluation has become constant background noise, too steady to notice. This steadiness produces a particular calm. Calm does not indicate comfort. It indicates predictability. Predictability allows the mind to conserve energy. It also limits imagination. Imagination, when it arises, is practical rather than aspirational. One imagines better timing, better phrasing, better alignment. One does not imagine altered structures. Structures appear fixed not because they are unchangeable, but because they are omnipresent. There is no clear vantage point from which to observe them as contingent. In public spaces, this internalization is evident in the absence of friction. People move smoothly around one another. Interruptions are rare. Voices rarely rise. Disorder, when it occurs, is quickly contained. A loud argument draws attention not because of its content, but because it violates rhythm. The violation is corrected by intervention or withdrawal. Most learn to avoid such moments instinctively. Dependence, now fully normalized, expresses itself through gratitude that is almost automatic. Thanks are given for small allowances, a nod, a pause, a delayed dismissal. The giver may not even register the exchange. Gratitude no longer reflects relief. It reflects comprehension. To be comprehending is to be safe. As the day wears on, fatigue returns, but it is managed efficiently. Movement slow, but not enough to appear careless. Speech shortens, but not enough to appear disengaged. This self-regulation requires effort, but the effort is familiar. Familiar effort does not feel burdensome. It feels necessary. Among peers, conversation is sparse. Much has already been shared through observation. Words add little. When speech occurs, it confirms alignment rather than exploring difference. Difference is unnecessary. Late in the day, some encounter minor frustrations. A request overlooked. A task reassigned without explanation. These moments register briefly, then dissolve. The emotional response is not suppressed. It simply never fully forms. Experience has taught that formation leads nowhere. Instead, attention shifts. The mind searches for the next acceptable move. This search is constant but quiet. It does not feel like anxiety. It feels like orientation. Orientation toward what is permissible. As night approaches again, the city offers fewer opportunities to adjust. Roles settle into their evening configurations. Some wait, some watch, some rest lightly. The sense of self during these hours is thin but stable. One knows where one belongs, even if belonging means waiting at the edge of action. Edges, after all, are still part of the structure. In the quiet, there is little reflection. Reflection would require stepping back, and stepping back would interrupt continuity. Continuity is what allows the next day to proceed without strain. The absence of reflection is not enforced. It is chosen because it works. By the time sleep arrives, the day has already been absorbed. Nothing stands out. Nothing demands resolution. The city has not imposed humiliation overtly. It has required only participation. Participation, repeated long enough, ceases to feel conditional. It feels natural. Tomorrow will complete the cycle, not by ending it, but by making its permanence visible, if only for a moment. The cycle does not conclude. It closes in on itself. By the time the day reaches what might be called its end, there is no sense of completion. Nothing has been resolved. Nothing needs to be. The mechanisms that shape the hours have done their work quietly and consistently. What remains is not fatigue alone, but familiarity. Those who move through the final moments of the day do so without urgency. The last tasks are performed carefully, but without hope of distinction. Distinction is no longer sought. It has been learned, slowly and without instruction. That distinction carries risk. Stability is preferable. In these hours, the city feels settled into its proper shape. Each person occupies a space that requires little explanation. Some are visible, some are useful, some are simply present. The differences between these states are understood instinctively. No one announces them. Those who wait continue to wait. The waiting now has no clear object. It is simply the posture that has been maintained all day. To stop waiting would feel like interruption, not relief. Elsewhere, those whose favor is sought withdraw into privacy. Their absence is accepted without resentment. Access was never assumed to be continuous. Its withdrawal requires no justification. Justification, like protest, has no place at this stage. As night deepens, the city grows quieter, but not more equal. Silence does not level difference. It only conceals it. In the absence of activity, the shape of dependence remains intact, resting but not dissolving. In small rooms and shared spaces, bodies arrange themselves for rest. The positions chosen are habitual. There is little thought involved. The body remembers where it is permitted to be comfortable. Comfort, like dignity, has been calibrated over time. If thoughts surface before sleep, they do not form into questions. They form into acknowledgments. This is how the day functions. This is how tomorrow will function. There is no need to imagine alternatives. Imagination has narrowed to what can be adjusted, not what can be changed. This narrowing is not experienced as loss. It is experienced as realism. Realism is praised. It keeps expectations aligned with outcomes. It prevents unnecessary friction. The city depends on this realism more than on obedience. Obedience can be enforced. Realism sustains itself. In this way, humiliation completes its work without ever announcing itself. It has not required spectacle or cruelty. It has required only repetition. Waiting, asking, yielding, being ignored. Each small enough to dismiss, together large enough to shape a life. The individual does not retire at night feeling diminished. He retires feeling oriented. He knows where he stands. He knows whom he must approach. He knows what must be endured. These forms of knowledge are practical. They ensure survival. By morning, they will rise with him, unremarked and unquestioned. The day will not begin with action. It will begin with awareness of who must be pleased, who must be avoided, and how quietly this must be done. The city will not call this humiliation. It will call it order. And because it is ordered, because it repeats without interruption, it will continue, unnoticed, unchallenged, and complete.